The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Princess Charlotte walked quietly through the royal gardens. At 8 years old, she had already learned to move with the careful grace expected of a member of the royal family. But today something felt different in the air. The usual bustle of palace staff seemed more hurried, more tense than normal. Charlotte had woken early, as she often did, drawn by the peaceful quiet of the palace before the day's formal activities began. Her nanny had still been sleeping, and, rather than wake her, Charlotte had slipped on her morning dress and soft shoes to explore the corridors she knew so well. The palace guards nodded respectfully as she passed, their red uniforms pristine and their faces kind but serious. As she rounded the corner near the Queen's private wing, Charlotte heard raised voices coming from one of the side corridors. This was unusual. The palace was typically a place of hushed conversations and careful whispers, where even disagreements were handled with dignity and restraint. The young princess paused, her natural curiosity getting the better of her royal training. The voices belonged to adults, and one of them sounded particularly angry. Charlotte recognized the sharp tone immediately. It was Camilla, the queen consort, her grandfather's wife. The other voice was unfamiliar, but it had the respectful, measured quality that palace staff used when speaking to members of the royal family. Charlotte crept closer, staying hidden behind a marble pillar. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but something about the intensity of the conversation made her feel that this was important. Her parents had always taught her to be observant, to understand the world around her, even if she was still young. This is absolutely unacceptable. Camilla's voice rang out, sharper than Charlotte had ever heard it before. The security protocol was clearly stated, and there are no exceptions to be made, regardless of the circumstances. The other voice, which Charlotte now realized belonged to one of the palace guards, responded with careful respect. "Your Majesty, I understand your concerns, but the situation required immediate attention." The visitor claimed to have urgent information regarding the safety of the royal family. "That is not your decision to make," Camilla snapped back. "You are here to follow orders, not to make judgment calls about palace security. Your job is to protect this family, and that means following the established protocols without question." Charlotte pressed herself closer to the pillar, her heart beating faster. She had never heard anyone speak to the palace guards this way before. Her grandfather, King Charles, always treated the staff with kindness and respect. Her father, Prince William, made it a point to know the names and families of the people who worked at the palace. This conversation felt different and wrong. The guard's voice remained steady and professional. "With respect, Your Majesty, I have been serving this royal family for 15 years. My record of service speaks for itself, and my commitment to the safety and security of every member of this household has never been questioned." "Your record of service is irrelevant if you cannot follow simple instructions," Camilla replied, her voice growing colder. "Perhaps 15 years has made you too comfortable, too willing to think you know better than your superiors." Charlotte felt a knot forming in her stomach. She knew this guard. His name was Thomas, and he had always been particularly kind to her and her brothers. He had a daughter about Charlotte's age, and he sometimes shared stories about her school achievements when Charlotte asked. He had been at the palace for as long as she could remember, and she had never seen him do anything but his job with complete dedication. "Your Majesty," Thomas continued, his voice still respectful but with a slight strain, "I acted in what I believe to be the best interests of the royal family." The individual in question provided credentials that appeared legitimate and spoke of a potential security threat that I felt required immediate attention. "Appeared legitimate." Camilla's voice rose. "You are not qualified to determine what appears legitimate. That is why we have proper channels, proper procedures, proper authorities to handle such matters. Your presumption in this matter is not just inappropriate, it is dangerous." Charlotte could hear footsteps now, as if the conversation was moving. She carefully peered around the pillar and saw Camilla pacing in the corridor, her face flushed with anger. Thomas stood at attention, his uniform perfect as always, but Charlotte could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have served this family through multiple monarchs," Thomas said quietly. "I have protected them through state visits, public appearances, and private moments. My loyalty has never been in question, and my judgment has been trusted by your predecessors." "My predecessors are not here now," Camilla shot back. "I am here, and I am telling you that your judgment was flawed, your actions were inappropriate, and your attitude is becoming increasingly insubordinate." The word insubordinate hung in the air like a weapon. Charlotte didn't fully understand what it meant, but she could tell from the way Thomas's posture stiffened that it was serious. She had heard her parents use words like that when they talked about people who might lose their jobs. "Your Majesty," Thomas said slowly, "I have dedicated my career to serving this family. If you believe my judgment is flawed or my service inadequate, then perhaps we should discuss this matter with His Majesty the King." Camilla's laugh was sharp and bitter. His Majesty has quite enough to concern himself with without being bothered by the disciplinary issues of palace staff. This matter is well within my authority to handle, and I intend to handle it decisively. Charlotte felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She didn't understand all the details of what was happening, but she could see that Thomas was being treated unfairly. He was a good man, a kind man, and he was being spoken to as if he had done something terrible when Charlotte was sure he had only been trying to help. The conversation continued, but Charlotte found herself thinking about all the times Thomas had been kind to her. When she had fallen and scraped her knee in the garden, he had been the one to help her up and make sure she was okay. When she had gotten lost in the palace's many corridors during a game of hide-and-seek with her brothers, Thomas had found her and gently led her back to her nanny without making her feel foolish. "Your service record will reflect this incident," Camilla was saying. "And if there are any future lapses in judgment or protocol, the consequences will be severe." "I understand, Your Majesty," Thomas replied. But Charlotte could hear something different in his voice now. It was still respectful, but there was sadness there too, and maybe disappointment. Charlotte wiped her eyes and tried to think. Her parents had taught her about fairness and justice, about standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. But she was just 8 years old, and Camilla was the queen consort. What could she possibly do? As she stood there, hidden behind the marble pillar, Charlotte remembered something her grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, had once told her. "A true royal," she had said, "is not someone who demands respect because of their title, but someone who earns respect through their actions and their treatment of others." The conversation in the corridor seemed to be winding down, but Charlotte could still feel the tension in the air. She heard Camilla's footsteps approaching, and she quickly pressed herself further back behind the pillar, hoping not to be seen. "This conversation is concluded," Camilla said firmly. "You will return to your duties, and you will remember this discussion the next time you are tempted to exceed your authority." "Yes, Your Majesty," Thomas replied, but his voice was quiet now, defeated in a way that made Charlotte's heart ache. As the footsteps faded in different directions, Charlotte remained hidden behind the pillar, her mind racing. She thought about what she had witnessed, about the unfairness of it, about the sadness in Thomas's voice. She thought about her grandmother's words, about what it meant to be truly royal. The morning sun was higher now, and soon the palace would be fully awake. Her nanny would be looking for her, and the day's activities would begin. But Charlotte knew that something important had happened this morning, something that would stay with her and shape what happened next. She stepped out from behind the pillar and looked down the empty corridor where the confrontation had taken place. The marble floors gleamed in the sunlight, and everything looked peaceful and normal. But Charlotte knew that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the most important moments happened when no one was supposed to be watching. As she walked slowly back toward her room, Charlotte thought about Thomas and his 15 years of faithful service. She thought about the sadness in his voice and the unfairness of what she had witnessed. Most of all, she thought about what her grandmother would have done, what her parents would want her to do, what being truly royal really meant. The young princess had no idea that this morning conversation would lead to something much more serious, something that would test her courage and her character in ways she never could have imagined. All she knew was that she had witnessed something wrong, and that somehow she needed to find a way to make it right. The palace continued its morning routine around her, but for Charlotte, everything had changed. She was no longer just a young princess playing in the gardens and learning her royal duties. She was someone who had seen injustice and who would have to decide what to do about it. As she reached her room and quietly slipped back inside, Charlotte looked at herself in the mirror. She looked the same as always, a young girl with bright eyes and a serious expression. But inside, she felt different. She felt older, more aware, more responsible for the world around her. The morning sun continued to rise over Buckingham Palace, but for Princess Charlotte, the day was just beginning in ways she never could have expected. 3 days had passed since Charlotte witnessed the confrontation between Camilla and Thomas in the palace corridor. The young princess had tried to push the incident from her mind, focusing instead on her daily lessons with her tutors and her afternoon playtime with her brothers, George and Louis. But every time she saw Thomas during his rounds, she noticed the change in him. Where once he had walked with confidence and pride, now his shoulders seemed slightly slumped. Where once he had greeted her with a warm smile and perhaps a small joke, now he simply nodded respectfully and continued on his way. The light in his eyes had dimmed, and Charlotte could see that the encounter with Camilla had affected him deeply. On this particular Thursday morning, Charlotte was supposed to be in the library with her French tutor, Madame Dubois. But the elderly woman had fallen ill with a cold, and Charlotte's morning had suddenly become free. Rather than inform her nanny immediately, Charlotte decided to use this unexpected time to explore the palace and perhaps find a way to speak with Thomas. She had been thinking about what she might say to him, how she might let him know that she had witnessed what happened, and that she thought Camilla had been unfair. But every time she tried to imagine the conversation, she realized how complicated it would be. She was just a child, and he was an adult with 15 years of experience. What could she possibly say that would make any difference? As Charlotte wandered through the palace corridors, she heard voices coming from the staff quarters. This area of the palace was normally off-limits to the royal family, but Charlotte had always been curious about where the people who worked for them spent their time. She approached quietly, staying hidden behind a doorway. The voices belonged to several palace staff members, and they were talking about Thomas. Charlotte's heart raced as she realized this might be her chance to understand more about what was happening. "It's not fair what they're doing to him," said a voice Charlotte recognized as belonging to Mrs. Henderson, one of the senior housekeeping staff. "Thomas has been nothing but loyal and dedicated all these years." "That's what makes it so hard to watch," replied another voice. "He's one of the best guards we've ever had. The royal family has always trusted him completely." "Well, the Queen Consort certainly doesn't seem to trust him now," said a third voice, bitter and angry. "The way she spoke to him the other day was disgraceful. I've never seen anything like it." Charlotte pressed closer to the doorway, her heart pounding. So other people had heard about what happened. It wasn't just her imagination or misunderstanding. "What exactly did she say?" asked Mrs. Henderson. "The rumors have been flying, but I haven't heard the details." "I was there cleaning the corridor," said the bitter voice, which Charlotte now recognized as belonging to Sarah, a young housemaid. She accused him of overstepping his authority, of making decisions he wasn't qualified to make. She spoke to him like he was some kind of criminal instead of a man who's devoted his life to protecting this family. "And all because he let someone through who claimed to have important security information," added the second voice. "I heard the person was legitimate after all. Turned out to be from MI5 with genuine intelligence about a potential threat." Charlotte's eyes widened. Thomas had been right to let the person through. He had been doing his job, protecting the royal family, and he had been correct in his judgment. Yet Camilla had treated him as if he had done something terrible. So he was right all along? Mrs. Henderson asked, echoing Charlotte's thoughts. "Completely right," Sarah confirmed. "But has anyone apologized to him? Has anyone acknowledged that he made the correct decision? Of course not. Instead, he's been walking around here for 3 days looking like a broken man." "It's not just about this one incident," said the second voice. "Thomas told me privately that this isn't the first time the Queen Consort has been difficult with the staff. She seems to think that her position gives her the right to treat people however she pleases." Charlotte felt anger building in her chest. This was exactly what her grandmother had warned against, using a royal title as an excuse to treat people badly instead of using it as a responsibility to treat people well. "What can we do about it?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "We can't exactly file a complaint against the Queen Consort." "Nothing," Sarah said sadly. "We just have to hope that Thomas can weather this storm and that things get better. But honestly, I'm worried about him. He's been talking about early retirement, about leaving the service entirely." Charlotte gasped quietly. Thomas was thinking about leaving? After 15 years of faithful service, Camilla's treatment was making him consider giving up his career? This was worse than Charlotte had imagined. "That would be a real loss," the second voice said. "Not just for the palace, but for the royal family. Thomas genuinely cares about them, especially the children. I've seen how he looks out for Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. It's more than just a job to him." At the mention of her name, Charlotte felt a surge of determination. Thomas had always looked out for her and her brothers. He had been kind and protective and caring. And now he was suffering because he had tried to do the right thing. "Well, there's nothing we can do except support him and hope for the best," Mrs. Henderson said with a sigh. "But it breaks my heart to see a good man treated this way." The voices began to fade as the staff members apparently moved away from the area. Charlotte remained hidden behind the doorway, her mind racing with everything she had learned. Thomas had been right in his decision. He was considering leaving the palace because of how Camilla had treated him, and the staff all knew that an injustice had been done. As Charlotte walked slowly back toward the main palace, she thought about her options. She could tell her parents what she had witnessed, but they were busy with important state matters and might not have time to deal with what they might see as a minor staff issue. She could try to speak to Thomas directly, but what could an 8-year-old really say to comfort a grown man facing such a professional crisis? Or she could find a way to speak to Camilla herself. The thought was frightening. Camilla was the queen consort, second only to Charlotte's grandfather in the royal hierarchy. She was an adult with years of experience in royal life. Charlotte was just a child who was supposed to be in lessons and play quietly when told. But as Charlotte walked through the palace corridors, she remembered her grandmother's lessons about duty and responsibility. Being royal wasn't about having privileges. It was about using those privileges to help others, to stand up for what was right, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Charlotte made her way to the palace gardens, where she often went to think. The roses were in full bloom, and the air was sweet with their scent. She sat on a marble bench that had been her grandmother's favorite spot, and tried to imagine what Queen Elizabeth would have done in this situation. Her grandmother had always said that the most important decisions were often the hardest ones. That being truly royal meant doing what was right even when it was difficult or scary. That sometimes a small person could make a big difference if they had the courage to speak up. Charlotte thought about Thomas's kind face and gentle voice. She thought about his daughter, who was about her age, and how proud she must be of her father's important job. She thought about how unfair it would be for him to lose that job or feel forced to leave because of one person's poor treatment. As she sat in the garden, Charlotte began to form a plan. It wasn't a complicated plan, but it was brave. She would find a way to speak to Camilla privately. She would tell her what she knew about the situation with Thomas. She would ask her to treat him more fairly. The plan scared Charlotte, but she knew it was the right thing to do. Her grandmother had always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing what needed to be done despite being afraid. And Charlotte was definitely afraid. But she was also determined. Thomas deserved better than what had happened to him. He deserved an apology, recognition that he had made the right decision, and assurance that his years of faithful service were valued and appreciated. Charlotte stood up from the marble bench and looked back toward the palace. Somewhere in those grand rooms and elegant corridors, Camilla was going about her royal duties, probably unaware that her treatment of a faithful guard had been witnessed and was causing such distress among the staff. The young princess took a deep breath and began walking back toward the palace. She didn't know exactly when or how she would approach Camilla, but she knew that she would find a way. Thomas had protected her family for 15 years. Now it was time for her to protect him. As Charlotte reached the palace doors, she felt nervous but resolute. Her grandmother had always said that the mark of true nobility was standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Today, Charlotte would find out what kind of person she truly was. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Charlotte disappeared through the grand entrance, her small figure dwarfed by the massive doors, but her determination as strong as any adult's. She had no idea how dramatically her plan would evolve, or how much courage she would need before this matter was resolved. All she knew was that something had to be done, and that sometimes, even an 8-year-old princess could make a difference if she had the courage to try. 2 weeks had passed since Charlotte first decided to confront Camilla about her treatment of Thomas, but finding the right opportunity had proven more difficult than the young princess had anticipated. Camilla's schedule was packed with official engagements, charity events, and royal duties, while Charlotte's own days were structured around lessons, meals, and carefully supervised activities. During this time, Charlotte had watched Thomas carefully, and what she saw worried her deeply. The dedicated guard who had once moved through the palace with quiet confidence now seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. His interactions with other staff members had become brief and professional, lacking the warmth and camaraderie that had always characterized his relationships within the palace. Most troubling of all, Charlotte had overheard Mrs. Henderson telling another staff member that Thomas had submitted a formal request for early retirement. The news hit Charlotte like a physical blow. One of the kindest, most dedicated people in the palace was preparing to leave because of how he had been treated, and no one in authority seemed to know or care. On this particular Friday afternoon, Charlotte was supposed to be in her art lesson with Professor Williams, learning about watercolor techniques. But the professor had been called away on a family emergency, leaving Charlotte with an unexpected free period. Her nanny, assuming the lesson was still ongoing, was attending to other duties, giving Charlotte a rare opportunity to move freely through the palace. As she walked through the corridors, Charlotte noticed unusual activity near the Queen's private wing. Palace staff were moving with more urgency than usual, and she could hear the distant sound of raised voices. Something was happening, something that had disrupted the normally calm atmosphere of the royal residence. Charlotte approached carefully, using the skills she had learned during countless games of hide and seek with her brothers to move quietly and stay hidden. As she got closer to the commotion, she could hear Camilla's voice, sharp and angry, coming from one of the private sitting rooms. "This is completely unacceptable," Camilla was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the partially open door. "The security arrangements for tomorrow's event were finalized weeks ago, and I will not have them changed at the last minute based on the whims of junior staff members." Charlotte crept closer, positioning herself behind a decorative column where she could hear clearly but remain unseen. Through the gap in the doorway, she could see Camilla pacing back and forth, her face flushed with anger. "Your Majesty," came a familiar voice, and Charlotte's heart sank as she recognized Thomas speaking. "The intelligence we received this morning suggests a credible threat to the event. MI5 has recommended additional security measures, and, as head of the Palace Guard detail, I am obligated to implement these recommendations." "You are obligated to follow my instructions," Camilla snapped back. "I am tired of your constant overreach, your presumption that you know better than your superiors. This is exactly the kind of behavior that led to our previous discussion." Charlotte could see Thomas standing at attention, his uniform impeccable as always, but his face showing the strain of the confrontation. Behind him stood two other palace guards, their expressions carefully neutral but their discomfort obvious. "Your Majesty," Thomas continued, his voice steady but tired, "my responsibility is to ensure the safety of the royal family. The threat assessment indicates a significant risk, and postponing or relocating tomorrow's event would be the prudent course of action." "The event will proceed as planned," Camilla declared firmly. "I will not have the Queen Consort's schedule disrupted because of exaggerated security concerns from staff members who seem to enjoy creating drama where none exists." Charlotte felt her anger rising. Thomas wasn't creating drama. He was trying to protect her family. How could Camilla not see that? How could she be more concerned about her schedule than about everyone's safety? "Your Majesty," Thomas said quietly, "in my 15 years of service, I have never made security recommendations lightly. The intelligence suggests that the threat is real and immediate. I am asking you to reconsider, for the safety of everyone involved." Camilla stopped pacing and turned to face Thomas directly. "Your 15 years of service seem to have given you an inflated sense of your own importance," she said coldly. "You are a guard, not a security analyst. You are here to follow orders, not to make policy decisions." "I understand my role, Your Majesty," Thomas replied. "But I also understand my duty to protect this family, even when that duty requires me to speak difficult truths." "Your duty," Camilla said, her voice rising, "is to do what you are told without question. Your constant challenges to my authority are becoming intolerable." Charlotte watched in horror as Camilla's anger seemed to escalate beyond anything she had witnessed before. The Queen Consort's face was red with fury, and her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Perhaps," Camilla continued, her voice now dangerously quiet, "it is time to consider whether your services are still required at this palace. Perhaps 15 years is quite enough, and we need guards who understand their place in the hierarchy." The threat was unmistakable, and Charlotte could see the impact it had on Thomas. His shoulders stiffened, and for a moment, his professional composure wavered. He had dedicated his career to protecting this family, and now he was being threatened with dismissal for doing exactly that. "Your Majesty," Thomas said slowly, "if you believe my service is no longer adequate, then I will submit my resignation immediately. But I want it on record that I am making this security recommendation based on credible intelligence, and that my concerns are genuine." "Your concerns are noted and dismissed," Camilla replied sharply. "And your resignation will not be necessary. I will be making personnel decisions based on what is best for this household, not on the wounded pride of staff members who cannot accept criticism." Charlotte could barely contain herself. Thomas was being treated abominably, and all for trying to do his job properly. She thought about her grandmother's teachings, about standing up for what was right, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As the confrontation continued, Charlotte noticed that Camilla's anger was becoming more physical. She was gesturing wildly with her hands, pointing at Thomas in an accusatory manner, and moving closer to him in what appeared to be an intimidating way. "You will implement the security arrangements exactly as I have specified," Camilla was saying, now standing directly in front of Thomas. "There will be no deviations, no additional measures, and no further discussions. Is that clear?" "Your Majesty," Thomas began, but Camilla cut him off. "I asked if that was clear," she repeated, her voice harsh and commanding. "Your Majesty," Thomas tried again, "I must respectfully insist that the security concerns be addressed. The safety of the royal family must take precedence over." Camilla's reaction was swift and shocking. Her hand rose as if to strike Thomas across the face, her anger finally boiling over into physical action. Charlotte could see the rage in her eyes, the complete loss of royal composure and dignity. But before Camilla's hand could connect with Thomas's face, a small voice rang out from the doorway. "Stop!" Everyone in the room froze as Charlotte stepped out from behind the column and into the sitting room. Her heart was racing, her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear and strong. Camilla spun around, her hand still raised, her face a mixture of shock and fury at being interrupted. Thomas and the other guards looked equally surprised to see the young princess appearing in the middle of such a heated confrontation. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger, "you should not be here. Return to your lessons immediately." But Charlotte didn't move. She looked at Thomas, saw the gratitude and concern in his eyes, and then turned her gaze back to Camilla. "You can't hit him," Charlotte said simply. "He's trying to protect us." The room fell completely silent. Camilla's hand slowly lowered to her side, but her face remained flushed with anger. Thomas looked at Charlotte with a mixture of admiration and worry, clearly concerned about what consequences she might face for her intervention. "Young lady," Camilla began, her voice dangerous, "you have no understanding of what is happening here. This is a matter between adults, and you will remove yourself immediately." Charlotte took a deep breath, drawing on every lesson about courage and duty her grandmother had ever taught her. "I know what's happening," she said quietly. "You're being mean to Thomas because he's trying to keep us safe. And that's not right." The confrontation had taken a dramatic turn. An 8-year-old princess had just challenged the queen consort in front of palace staff, defending a guard who was trying to do his job. Charlotte had no idea what would happen next, but she knew she had done the right thing. As she stood in that elegant sitting room, facing down the anger of one of the most powerful people in the palace, Charlotte felt scared, but proud. Her grandmother would have been proud too. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant standing up to people who were bigger and more powerful than you. The silence stretched on, heavy with tension and possibility. Charlotte had taken her stand, but the consequences of her brave intervention were yet to unfold. The silence in the sitting room stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Charlotte stood her ground, her small frame seeming to fill the doorway with determination, while Camilla stared at her with a mixture of shock, fury, and disbelief. Thomas and the other guards remained frozen in their positions, uncertain how to react to such an unprecedented situation. "Princess Charlotte," Camilla said finally, her voice controlled but seething with underlying anger, "you will apologize for your interruption and leave this room immediately. This conversation does not concern you." Charlotte looked at Thomas, who gave her the slightest shake of his head, clearly worried about what might happen to her if she continued to defy the queen consort. But Charlotte had spent 2 weeks watching this good man suffer, 2 weeks knowing that an injustice had been done, and she was not about to back down now. "It does concern me," Charlotte replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Thomas protects me and George and Louis every day. He's been kind to us for as long as I can remember. And you're treating him badly for trying to keep us safe." Camilla's face darkened further. "You are a child," she said coldly. "You have no understanding of palace security, staff management, or the complexities of royal duty. Your presence here is inappropriate, and your comments are impertinent." "My grandmother taught me about royal duty," Charlotte said, thinking of Queen Elizabeth's gentle but firm lessons about responsibility and fairness. She said that being royal means treating people with respect, especially people who work hard to take care of us. The mention of the late queen seemed to hit Camilla like a physical blow. Her jaw tightened, and, for a moment, Charlotte thought she might actually strike her instead of Thomas. But, then, Camilla seemed to regain some measure of control. Your grandmother is not here, Camilla said icily. I am the queen consort now, and you will show me the respect that position demands. You will apologize for your interference and leave this room. Charlotte felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She thought about all the times Thomas had helped her, all the times he had made her feel safe and protected. She thought about his kind smile and his gentle way of speaking to children. She thought about how unfair it was that he might lose his job or feel forced to leave because of this treatment. I won't apologize for stopping you from hitting him, Charlotte said quietly. That would have been wrong. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Camilla's face went white, then red again, as she realized that not only had her near assault been witnessed, but that it was being called out by a member of the royal family in front of palace staff. I was not going to strike anyone, Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction. Everyone in the room had seen her raised hand, had witnessed her loss of control. Yes, you were, Charlotte said simply. I saw you. Thomas was trying to tell you about danger, and you were going to hit him for it. Thomas finally spoke, his voice gentle and concerned. Your Royal Highness, he said to Charlotte, perhaps you should return to your lessons. I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter for adults to resolve. Charlotte looked at Thomas with surprise. Even now, even after everything that had happened, he was trying to protect her from getting into trouble. His kindness only strengthened her resolve. No, she said firmly. Someone needs to tell the truth about what's been happening. You've been sad for weeks because of how you've been treated. Mrs. Henderson and Sarah and everyone else have been talking about how unfair it is. And now you want to retire early because you feel like you can't do your job properly anymore. Camilla's eyes narrowed. You've been eavesdropping on staff conversations? That behavior is completely unacceptable for a member of the royal family. I heard them talking about Thomas because they care about him, Charlotte replied. They know he's a good man who's been treated badly. They know he was right to let that MI5 person through the security checkpoint. They know he's been doing his job perfectly for 15 years. The revelation that the staff were discussing the situation openly seemed to shake Camilla. She looked around the room at the guards, perhaps wondering what they had heard, what they thought, how far word of her behavior had spread. The opinions of housekeeping staff are irrelevant, Camilla said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier authority. Security decisions are made by senior officials, not by guards who think they know better. Thomas is a senior official, Charlotte protested. He's been here longer than almost anyone. He knows how to protect us. And the MI5 person was real, wasn't he? Thomas was right to let him through. Camilla's silence confirmed what Charlotte already knew from overhearing the staff conversations. Thomas had made the correct decision, but rather than receiving praise or recognition, he had been chastised and humiliated. That is beside the point, Camilla said finally. Protocols exist for a reason, and they must be followed regardless of the outcome. But if the protocols are wrong, shouldn't we change them? Charlotte asked innocently. If following the protocols would have put us in danger, wasn't Thomas right to break them to keep us safe? The logic of an 8-year-old was cutting through Camilla's arguments with uncomfortable clarity. Thomas looked at Charlotte with something approaching admiration, while the other guards struggled to maintain their neutral expressions. You are not qualified to judge palace protocols, Camilla said, her patience clearly wearing thin. These matters are far beyond your understanding. I understand fairness, Charlotte replied. I understand kindness. And I understand that Thomas has been protecting my family since before I was born. He doesn't deserve to be yelled at and threatened for doing his job. Camilla turned to Thomas with renewed fury. You've been discussing palace business with a child? You've been filling her head with your version of events. Your Majesty, Thomas said quickly, I have never discussed this matter with Princess Charlotte or any member of the royal family. I would never involve a child in adult workplace issues. Then, how does she know so much about what happened? Camilla demanded. Charlotte stepped forward. Because I was there, she said simply. I heard you yelling at Thomas in the corridor 2 weeks ago. I saw how sad it made him. And I heard the staff talking about how unfair it was. Camilla stared at Charlotte in shock. You were eavesdropping on a private conversation? I wasn't trying to, Charlotte explained. I was just walking through the palace, and I heard loud voices. I got scared, so I hid behind the pillar. But then, I heard you being mean to Thomas, and I didn't know what to do. The admission that Charlotte had witnessed the original confrontation seemed to deflate some of Camilla's anger. She realized that her treatment of Thomas had been observed by a member of the royal family, that her behavior was known to others beyond the immediate participants. What you heard, Camilla said carefully, was a necessary discussion about proper protocols and chain of command. Perhaps it seemed harsh to a child's ears, but adult workplace relationships are complex. It wasn't complex, Charlotte said with the straightforward honesty of a child. You were being mean to someone who was trying to help us. And just now, you were going to hit him. That's not how royal people are supposed to behave. The reference to royal behavior hit its mark. Camilla prided herself on her understanding of royal protocol and dignity. To be lectured about proper royal conduct by an 8-year-old in front of palace staff was deeply humiliating. You are dismissed, Camilla said to Charlotte, her voice cold as ice. We will discuss your behavior later with your parents. Good, Charlotte said, surprising everyone in the room. I want to talk to my parents about this. I want to tell them how Thomas has been treated and how sad it's made him. The threat to involve Prince William and Princess Catherine seemed to give Camilla pause. She clearly hadn't expected Charlotte to welcome the prospect of parental involvement. Thomas stepped forward carefully. Your Royal Highness, he said to Charlotte, I truly appreciate your concern, but perhaps it would be best if you allowed the adults to handle this situation. Charlotte looked at Thomas with determination. Adults haven't been handling it, she said. You've been sad and thinking about leaving, and nobody in charge seems to care. Sometimes children have to speak up when adults aren't doing the right thing. The wisdom in her words was undeniable. Charlotte had watched a situation deteriorate for 2 weeks, had seen a good man suffer in silence, and had finally found the courage to intervene when no one else would. As the confrontation reached this unexpected climax, with an 8-year-old princess defending a palace guard against the queen consort, it was clear that the situation had moved far beyond a simple workplace disagreement. The implications of what had happened, what had been witnessed, and what had been said would ripple through the palace in ways that none of them could fully anticipate. Charlotte stood in that elegant sitting room, surrounded by adults, having just challenged one of the most powerful people in the royal household. She was scared, but she was also proud. She had done what her grandmother would have wanted her to do. She had stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. The next few moments would determine whether her courage would be rewarded or punished, whether justice would finally be done for Thomas, and whether the palace would learn that sometimes the smallest voices can speak the most important truths. The tension in the sitting room was broken by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with purpose and urgency. Charlotte recognized the distinctive sound of her father's stride, and her heart began to race for an entirely different reason. Prince William was approaching, and with him came the inevitable reckoning for what had just transpired. Your Royal Highness, Thomas said quickly to Charlotte, perhaps you should. But before he could finish his sentence, Prince William appeared in the doorway, followed by Princess Catherine and 2 senior palace officials. The prince's expression immediately shifted from concern to confusion to alarm as he took in the scene before him, his 8-year-old daughter standing defiantly in front of the queen consort, while palace guards looked on with barely concealed tension. Charlotte, Princess Catherine said, her voice filled with maternal concern. What are you doing here? I thought you were in your art lesson. Charlotte looked at her parents, then at Thomas, then at Camilla. She had come this far, had found the courage to speak up for what was right, and she wasn't going to back down now, even in front of her parents. Professor Williams had an emergency, Charlotte said simply. And I heard shouting, so I came to see what was wrong. Prince William's eyes moved from his daughter to Camilla, noting the queen consort's flushed face and obvious agitation. Is everything all right here? He asked diplomatically. Camilla straightened her shoulders, clearly attempting to regain her composure and authority. Everything is fine, William. I was having a discussion with the guard staff about security protocols for tomorrow's event. Charlotte interrupted inappropriately, and I was just sending her back to her lessons. Charlotte looked at her father with wide, honest eyes. That's not what happened, Papa. Prince William's attention sharpened. He had always taught his children the importance of honesty, and he could tell that Charlotte had something important to say. What did happen, Charlotte? Camilla was going to hit Thomas, Charlotte said simply, her words falling into the room like stones into still water. The silence that followed was deafening. Prince William's expression darkened, while Princess Catherine gasped quietly. The senior palace officials exchanged shocked glances, and Thomas closed his eyes briefly, as if preparing for the storm that was about to break. "I beg your pardon," Prince William said, his voice carefully controlled but with an undertone that made everyone in the room understand the seriousness of the moment. Camilla's face went white. "That is completely untrue. The child has misunderstood what she saw. I was simply making a gesture during our conversation." She raised her hand to hit him. Charlotte interrupted, her voice growing stronger as she felt the support of her parents. "Thomas was trying to tell her about danger, about security problems for tomorrow, and she got angry and was going to hit him. So I told her to stop." Prince William looked directly at Thomas. "Is this true?" Thomas found himself in an impossible position. To confirm Charlotte's account would be to accuse the Queen Consort of attempted assault. To deny it would be to make the young princess appear to be lying. His years of training and diplomatic discretion warred with his fundamental honesty. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said carefully. There was a disagreement about security protocols. The discussion became heated. Princess Charlotte's intervention prevented any potential escalation of the situation. It was a masterful response that confirmed Charlotte's account without directly accusing Camilla, but Prince William was experienced enough in royal diplomacy to read between the lines. "I see," Prince William said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room understand that there would be consequences. He turned to one of the senior palace officials. "Please escort the princess back to her room and arrange for her nanny to supervise her afternoon activities." Charlotte looked panic-stricken. "But, Papa, I was telling the truth. Thomas was trying to protect us. And I believe you, sweetheart," Prince William said gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you did the right thing. But now the adults need to have a conversation, and you need to let us handle it from here." The relief on Charlotte's face was evident. Her father believed her. He understood that she had been trying to help, trying to do what was right. As she was gently led from the room by a palace official, she looked back at Thomas and gave him a small, encouraging smile. Once Charlotte was gone, Prince William turned his full attention to the remaining adults in the room. His expression was no longer that of a concerned father, but of a future king who had just learned of a serious breach of royal protocol and basic human decency. "Thomas," he said, "please give me your account of what happened here today and what led up to it." Thomas straightened to his full attention, his years of service giving him the courage to speak honestly to his future sovereign. "Your Royal Highness, I received credible intelligence this morning about a potential security threat to tomorrow's event. Based on this intelligence, I recommended additional security measures and suggested considering postponement or relocation of the event." "And the Queen Consort's response?" Prince William asked. "Her Majesty disagreed with my assessment and instructed me to proceed with the original security arrangements," Thomas replied diplomatically. "That's not what happened," Camilla interjected, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "He has repeatedly overstepped his authority, challenged my decisions, and shown a complete lack of respect for the chain of command." Princess Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. "And that justified raising your hand to strike him?" Camilla's face flushed again. "I did not strike anyone. If my gesture was misinterpreted by a child, Charlotte is 8 years old," Prince William interrupted. "But she knows the difference between a gesture and a threat of violence. And, more importantly, she knows right from wrong." One of the senior palace officials stepped forward carefully. "Your Royal Highness, if I may, there have been some concerns among the staff regarding workplace relations and management practices." Prince William's expression suggested that he was not entirely surprised by this revelation. "What kind of concerns?" "Complaints about harsh treatment of long-serving staff members, unreasonable demands, and what some have described as bullying behavior," the official said carefully. Camilla turned on the official with fury. "How dare you listen to gossip from disgruntled employees? I have been working to maintain proper standards and discipline in this household. By threatening to dismiss staff members who are doing their jobs," Princess Catherine asked pointedly. "By creating an atmosphere of fear and tension among people who have served this family faithfully for years." Thomas cleared his throat quietly. "Your Royal Highnesses, if I may, I have submitted a request for early retirement. I feel that my continued presence here may be causing unnecessary conflict." Prince William looked at Thomas with genuine sadness. "Thomas, you have been protecting this family since before my children were born. Your dedication and service have been exemplary. The idea that you would consider leaving because of how you've been treated is absolutely unacceptable." He turned to Camilla, and, for the first time, his diplomatic restraint gave way to genuine anger. "Camilla, Thomas has served this family with distinction for 15 years. He has protected my children, kept my family safe, and earned the respect and affection of everyone who works here. The idea that you would threaten him for doing his job, that you would create such a hostile environment that he feels compelled to leave, is completely unacceptable. Camilla's defiance seemed to crumble under the weight of Prince William's disapproval. I was simply trying to maintain proper protocols. By threatening to strike a member of our staff, Prince William's voice rose slightly. By creating such a toxic atmosphere that an 8-year-old child felt compelled to intervene? This is not how members of this family behave, Camilla. This is not what we represent. Princess Catherine stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Camilla, the people who work here are not just employees. They're part of our extended family. They care for our children, protect our home, and dedicate their lives to serving this institution. They deserve our respect, our gratitude, and our protection. The weight of their disapproval, combined with the knowledge that Charlotte's intervention had exposed her behavior to scrutiny, seemed to finally break through Camilla's defensiveness. She looked around the room at the faces watching her, saw the disappointment and disapproval, and perhaps began to understand the gravity of what had happened. She began, then stopped. For a moment, the Queen Consort seemed to struggle with words, with the realization that her behavior had been fundamentally wrong. Prince William looked at Thomas. Your retirement request is denied, he said firmly. We need you here, this family needs you, and I will not allow good people to be driven away by unacceptable behavior. He turned back to Camilla. As for you, we need to have a very serious conversation about your role here, your responsibilities, and your treatment of the people who make this household function. Thomas looked overwhelmed with emotion. Your Royal Highness, I thank you. I had hoped to continue serving this family, but you felt unwelcome in your own workplace, Prince William said sadly. That should never happen to anyone, but especially not to someone who has given so much of their life to protecting us. As the immediate crisis began to resolve, Princess Catherine smiled softly. We should thank Charlotte, she said. If she hadn't had the courage to speak up, this situation might have continued to escalate. She showed remarkable bravery today. Prince William nodded, his expression proud and sad at the same time. She showed the kind of character and moral courage that we hope to instill in all our children. She saw injustice and spoke up, even when it was difficult and scary. In the end, it had taken the intervention of an 8-year-old princess to expose a serious problem and begin the process of making things right. Charlotte's courage had not only protected Thomas from potential physical harm but had also brought to light a pattern of behavior that needed to be addressed. As the adults continued their difficult conversation, Charlotte was in her room, finally, able to relax for the first time in weeks. She had done what her grandmother would have wanted her to do. She had stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. She had spoken truth to power, even when it was scary. Most importantly, Thomas would be staying. The kind, dedicated man who had protected her family for 15 years would continue to do so, and he would no longer have to suffer in silence. Sometimes, Charlotte reflected, the most important moments in life came when you had to choose between what was easy and what was right. Today, she had chosen what was right, and justice had been served.